Hello and welcome back to J.P.'s World of Wrestling. Sorry, I don't know what I was doing there. Okay, so today I'm doing another top 5 list. But I gotta be honest with you, I already kind of recorded this one, but I kind of didn't like the way it turned out. Plus, there's a few guys I wanted to mention in the honorable mention section that I didn't bring up. So, I'm redoing this video for the sake of my own peace of mind. So today's list is my personal top 5 high flyers. That's right. These guys that flew through the air without personal regard in order to do aerial offensive moves to their opponents, hopefully to contribute towards a victory. That's right. So these are just personal top 5 guys that I was always impressed with and I always liked. And I'm sure your list is probably different. That's what makes this world go round, and there's nothing wrong with that. And at the end of this video, I want to hear about them. I want you to leave them in the comments below. But we'll get to that later. You wait till I'm done. So, okay, anyway. So my number 5 pick is Mark Merrow. That is correct. A man who was known in WCW as Johnny B. Bad. But when he came to the WWF, he was known as the Wild Man, Mark Merrow. And then they turned him into kind of a boxer, and he was called Marvelous Mark Merrow. But in WCW, he was Johnny B. Bad. He was kind of supposed to be like a Little Richard type character, and apparently Vince McMahon loved it. He loved the character, and he wanted to get Johnny B. Bad for the WWF. Unfortunately, the name Johnny B. Bad was a Dusty Rhodes creation, and that name belonged to World Championship Wrestling. So Vince couldn't use that name. But Vince brought Mark Merrow in anyway, and he gave him the persona of the Wild Man, Mark Merrow. And for a while, Mark Merrow was coming to the ring with his wife, Rena, who later became Sable. But anyway, he had a lot of high-flying moves. And a lot of his high-flying moves I always thought were very smooth. He was always right on target, and he hardly ever missed a step. And he was very smooth with his off the top rope movements. And a couple notable moves that he went to the top turnbuckle, then he did like a 360 forward flip to land on his opponent with a splash. And then he did this move where he would go up to the top turnbuckle, flip around, and then do a backflip or a moonsault. So I always thought that was impressive. And plus, of course, he was very charismatic. He was, no lack of persona there. So for all those reasons, Mark Merrow comes in at number 5. So number 4 might surprise some of you, but he always impressed me, and it's Bam Bam Bigelow. That's right. Now Bam Bam is already on my big man list, but he's also on my high flyer list because Bam Bam, despite his size, he could go to the top rope and fly off the top rope with a headbutt. He did cartwheels, he could do moonsaults, he could do backflips. Bam Bam was extremely athletic, especially for a guy his size, and I was always very impressed with Bam Bam. In fact, like I've also said on another video, the only thing that held Bam Bam back in being a bigger superstar was his voice. His voice didn't really match his persona. He looked like he ought to have had the voice of a really intimidating sort, but really he had kind of a higher voice. He had kind of a thick New Jersey accent, so I'm not sure that maybe his voice should have been the thing that kept him back, but what do I know? So anyway, Bam Bam Bigelow was really great at the high flying moves. So that's why he makes my list at number 4. Great job, Bam Bam. Now, number 3 is the guy who probably should be higher on my list because I'm such a huge fan of his in everything they did, and he really should be on more of my lists. But everything he does is really great. So I'm talking about Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho did a lot of high-flying tactics. A few notable ones was he would do the springboard drop kick, where he would sort of go to the corner, springboard off the second rope, and turn around to do a drop kick. He would also do a missile drop kick off the top turnbuckle. And then he would also do what he called the lion salt, where his opponent would be laying in the ring, and he would run, jump over his opponent, springboard off the second rope, and do a backflip onto his opponent. Those were just a few notable moves that he did. He also did a lot of other high-flying moves, but he could also, grapple, and he was kind of an all-around wrestler, and again, no lack of personality. That's why he's been able to break through to the mainstream entertainment world. He's a former game show host. He's an actor. He's a rock and roll singer, and he does it all, including high flying, which is why he makes my list at number 3. I don't know why I'm making faces. I'm sorry. I honestly don't know why I make faces. I think I'm trying to make things entertaining and happy. Yay! But anyway. So number 2 is a guy that kind of goes way back, and I also thought about putting him on my underrated and underappreciated wrestlers list, but it's Lanny Poffo, the genius Lanny Poffo. Now, I thought about putting him on my underrated list because nobody talks about how great the genius was, especially as a heel. He would kind of prance around the ring, and he would do these kind of ballet type moves in the corner when he was like pulling up his knee pads. He would do cartwheels, and he would fly and bounce around the ring, and he would play psychological games with his opponent's heads. But in his early days in the WWF, he would fly off the top rope doing moonsaults, and I think he's probably the first wrestler to ever do that. I don't remember ever seeing a guy before him doing moonsaults from the top rope, and so that was pretty impressive and pretty amazing, and that's why the late great Lanny Poffo lands on my list at number 2. Now, number 1 is also a guy that probably should have been on more of these lists because he's so great, and I'm going to put him on a special other list coming up here pretty soon, but it's Owen Hart. The Rocket, the King of Hearts, Owen Hart. This guy, he can do so much. He could do so much. Like, whenever he was the Blue Blazer, he would go into the ring and then he would just do a backflip off the top turnbuckle. But when he was in the ring, he would do, flying drop kicks and flying elbow drops, and he would do all kinds of stuff. And he would do like a flying spinning cartwheel or flying spinning heel kick that always looked pretty good. And he, flying clotheslines and all that. He was just a great wrestler, obviously, because he's a Hart from the Hart family. And, he trained under his father, Stu Hart, a legend, and trained in the dungeon. And, Owen Hart, he's great. He's known for his practical jokes and ribs backstage or behind the scenes. But Owen Hart was always very impressive. And he was taken from us way too soon. But Owen Hart, I salute you. You make my high flyers list at number 1. So there's also a few guys that could have made this list, but I at least wanted to mention them, which I didn't my first time around, which was why I'm sort of re-recording this video. So one honorable mention I want to mention is Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero, also a great high flyer, but I guess technically he was part of kind of the Lucha Libre Mexican wrestler, luchador style wrestling. And he could have been put in that classification, but I think he was a lot more, versatile than that. I mean, he wasn't just a high flyer. He could also grapple. He could brawl. He could do hardcore stuff. He was definitely one of the greats, and he's also another one that was taken from us way too soon. But who could forget his frog splash? He would go to the top rope with his opponent laying on the mat, and then he would jump. He would kind of do this tuck move, then he would do this big splash. He called it the frog splash. And it was always very impressive. But another move he always did that I always enjoyed was his opponent would be laying down over by the ropes, and then he would go out on the ring apron, and he would pull on the top rope and do kind of a frontward flip in the ring and kind of land on his opponent with his upper back, and then quickly get back up. That was always kind of an impressive move. Plus, he would do all the lucha libre style moves, and so Eddie Guerrero is an honorable mention. Now, another guy I wanted to mention was Rob Van Dam. ECW legend Rob Van Dam, and actually, he's going to be definitely on another list that I'm doing. But as a high flyer, nobody could deny that Rob Van Dam was way up there as one of the best. And he also did a frog splash from the top rope, but he got some really big height out of it. He got way up there. In fact, he had such an impact when he landed, he would always have to roll over and hold his stomach a little bit, and then he would cover his opponents. But Rob Van Dam, he would do these springboard karate kicks and all kinds of forward tumbling moves with chairs and stuff, and he did it all. And then the last guy I want to mention is Rey Mysterio. Now, for the record, I am not a huge fan of the Lucha Libre style wrestling. I'm not going to knock it just because there's a lot of people that love it and they think it's awesome, and I think that's great. Just personally, when I see it, there's a lot of wasted effort, wasted moves, and spiraling moves that result in just an arm drag and just a lot of wasted effort. That's my view of it. But Rey Mysterio, he kind of hit different for some reason for me. He did a lot of. For one thing, he had to be high flyer because he was too small to be a grappler. He was too small to be a technical wrestler, and he was kind of too small to be really a brawler. So he kind of had to be a high flyer. That was really his only option, being a small guy. But no, he would do all kinds of impressive moves from the top rope and through the ropes, and he did all kinds of, wild stuff through the air, which is why he's an honorable mention on my high flyers top 5 list. So Rey, and actually he's still doing it. He's still in the WWE. He's doing this angle with his son Dominic, where they're doing a son betrays the father story, which is actually pretty good. I'm not too much into modern wrestling, but that is kind of a cool story that they're doing. So, anyway, that is my top 5 high flyers list. Now, all of you probably have a different list. You probably have different high flyers that you thought were good, and I want to hear about them. Leave them in the comments. And if you're new here, you can go ahead and like the video, you can subscribe to my channel, and you can share it on social media if you want. And I will see you next time.